All right. Good evening, everybody. My name's Lee Menius. I work with the NC Choices program. We're part of NC State University Extension and the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. And we were also hoping or planning on having Matt LaRue. He's an ag marketing and extension specialist at Cornell University's Charles Dyson School of Economics and Management. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us this evening. So you're stuck with me. So, but I will make the best we can. So I do give a lot of credit to this. This is a joint presentation. You also see Sarah Blackland here. She's our program director at NC Choices. But she and I and Matt LaRue have worked closely on several projects between Cornell and NC State University, and one of them being the Meat Suite, and part of that being the Meat Suite price calculator, which we'll dive into this evening. And so as we go into this, there's a poll that's popped up. If you hadn't had a chance, if you don't mind answering that, we're going to pull that down here in a few minutes. Just trying to get a little background, figure out, what are y'all doing as far as marketing, raising sheep and marketing meat at this point? Kind of give us somewhere to start with. You should have a chat or a Q&A box at the bottom. Sarah and Kelly will be monitoring that over the course of this. So if you've got questions, pop them in there. If they may answer them. If it's something, needs further explanation, drop it in there and they can flag me down. I don't see the chat, so they'll moderate that for me, and we'll try to get through this in time to have some Q&A time there at the end. But I will, give you the disclaimer if we're going to cover a lot of ground here this evening. And so if we move a little fast or something, like I said, drop in there if you need a little further explanation. But then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. I'll have both mine and Matt's contact information at the end. So, if questions arise later, you can feel free to reach out and contact us. All right, Sarah, if you want to go ahead and kill the poll, we'll get started. So when we think of this and think of direct marketing meat, I started back in late 90s, and at that time it was kind of niche or alternative ag. And one of the things being that we always talked about we were going to be price makers instead of price takers, and we were going to get rich because we were going to cut out the middleman and do his work. And then at some point in time, somebody smarter than me pointed out, you always got to be prepared to, if you're going to do the middleman's work and keep his share of the money, you got to be prepared to do his work. So keep that in mind as you move forward and you look at different marketing channels. The overall other thing that's kind of an overall thing you need to really consider and view your lens for viewing marketing and viewing marketing strategy is really think about your farm goals. And putting up here a whole list of things. And there's no wrong answer here. Some people may argue, they don't want to compete against somebody that's just in it for the tax write-off. But at the end of the day, we all have our particular reasons for getting into it. And we need to sit down and take an honest assessment of what that is. Is it the lifestyle? Are we just kind of trying to float through and make enough money to do it and, raise our kids and teach them the value of raising animals and selling, and producing meat? And we're doing it for the tax write-off on the land. Are we doing it to create that world-class product? We could simply be looking to add some value to those outliers in our groups, those small those oddball lambs that don't really fit within the crowd. Or are we sincerely looking at maximizing every dollar we can get out of every lamb we can at any given moment? And then for others, it's going to be viewing this as a way to create a stable market. Because as with anything else, sheep, cattle, pigs, there is a price cycle that goes up and down. And depending on where you are on that cycle, it could be significantly higher in price certain months out of the year. And so some people look at it and try to create a meat market as a way to create a steady plane of income. And so maybe they're not capturing the peaks as high as they possibly could, but they're not taking hits in the valleys either on those economic swings. Most important thing though is with this and any other business operation is really sit down and make a plan. But first and foremost, if you're going to effectively price anything, you've got to know your cost. And when you sit down and make that plan, the things you're going to consider as you're figuring out that business plan and writing this down and trying to come up with something to move forward on. So you got to look at your breeds and genetics that you have or you have access to. Think about your feed program, what kind of processing options you have access to, where are you marketing, what are your local markets, how far are you willing to travel, what the price point of those markets are, and then volume. Because, marketing um, can be significantly impacted by what kind of volume you are after to produce. So, your marketing plan is going to look a lot different for 1,500 lambs a year than it is going to look for 15, most likely. And so keep this in mind, kind of come up with something that works for your farm, works for your situation, and meets your goals moving forward. I will say this about breeds and feed. When it comes to these two, a good feed program is going to be one of the cornerstones of your program. As we really shorten, so anytime we look at creating direct to consumer pipeline, what we're doing is we're shortening that supply chain up. And so when we do that, the closer we get to that consumer, if we're the ones that are selling them a package of lamb meat and they're taking it home and fixing it, that's a much shorter supply chain than if I'm taking them down to the local stock sale and then they're going to a backgrounder and then ended up in a feedlot and then ended up going through a processing plant and to a national distribution chain. That consumer, if I sell them something at the farmer's market and they have a bad eating experience, guess what? They know exactly who to come and complain to, right? And so we want to do everything within our capability to make sure we're producing a good product that meets their expectations, that makes them feel good about the prices they're paying for us. And taking a serious look at your breeds and your feed, making sure you have a feed program that matches what your breeds are capable of and your genetics can do. But that feed program is going to be a cornerstone. Whether we're talking about grass or we're talking about grains, it's going to be the cornerstone of your program and make one of the most important pieces of making sure you're getting that quality product to market. Regardless of the feed program, keep those animals moving forward and gaining weight. We want to make sure we meeting the nutritional requirements of those animals and we're getting a good production out of them. So as we move into marketing, thinking about where, if you're not doing this, or maybe you are already marketing meat, where are you marketing and what are those outlets? A couple of examples there, farm stores, farmers markets, online sales, and then traditional bulk freezer sales. We talk about freezer beef, freezer pork, freezer lamb, generally referring to the act of selling whole halves and quarter animals in bulk to folks. And that's kind of the original direct to consumer market here in the rural areas of the country, is when your neighbors would come and just buy a whole animal just to fill the freezer up. But when you think through these, or when you're assessing these channels and you're thinking about, you got to remember that each one of these comes with a whole different set of expenses, a set of time requirements, and and just overall commitment. If you're developing a farm store, they're on your farm and you're going to sell it, you've got to think about staffing, you got to think about power bills, you've got to think about keeping inventory flow going, and as well as your marketing of the product. Farmers markets, if you're going to farmers markets, considering one down around the corner, maybe 5 miles down the road, is going to have a whole different set of expenses than one that you travel 100 miles one way to get to, because you have time investment, you have mileage, you have vehicles, you have all these different expenses that go with these. So when you're evaluating your markets and you're thinking about your pricing, remember that your marketing channels actually are all going to vary and can vary pretty significantly. And you need to make sure you account for those when you're assessing the cost of each. And therefore, when you're doing your pricing, you need to assess that cost and make sure you're covering those additional costs for these markets in your pricing. You really need to identify your customers. This is something that's really can be a challenge with sheep production. Sheep we kind of tend to think of as more of a niche meat product. You know, everybody eats beef, everybody eats pork. You start talking to people about eating lamb, and depending on what part of the country you're in, lamb may be an interesting sell to make. Uh, we used to, when we raised a lot of lamb and sold at farmers markets, people would always ask me if we had a lot of Hispanic customers. It's like, no, we never had Hispanic customers, hardly at all. Our customers ended up being the baby boomers that were in the Peace Corps in the 60s and 70s and did stints in South America or in the Middle East or in India. And they had nostalgic, interest in doing lamb dishes because it was something that took them back to their their being in their 20s and hanging out in the Peace Corps. So get to know your customers and that customer base, and who you want to target. And so this is a chart that Matt's put together. If you've ever watched one of his marketing talks, I'm sure you've seen this. But what it's illustrating is that when you look at these, the further you go, so if you start here at the bottom and you're talking about whole carcass and you're no processing, maybe you're selling to an aggregator who is then going to be, a regional branded product or in commodity market. As you move up the stack here, you entail a higher price per pound. But along with that higher price per pound, the correlation here is that your marketing effort is required to achieve that price per pound also increases along with it. So while you may be able to get the highest price per piece at farmers markets, it's also going to be one of the things that is going to have a much higher marketing requirement than saying taking them to the local sale barn or working with an aggregator for a regional brand. So when it comes to pricing, we always figure we can sell it. You can always sell something. You can sell it you can always about sell something to anybody as long as it's cheap enough and they perceive it as a good deal. But the key here is making sure that we know that we are selling it for for more than what we've actually got in the production of that product and the marketing and the delivery of it. And so the only way to really effectively do pricing is you got to know your cost. And whether we're talking about the cost of each sales channel or we're talking about the cost of production, yes, I am aware these are all beef cuts. This is a spreadsheet that we put together and used for about 20 years in our operation. And we would take and just record number of packs we got, weights, etc. when we would get animals back. We didn't do this for every one, but we would do it occasionally enough that we could keep track and we learned what our genetics were capable of. And so that helped us track. That was good record keeping. It helped us learn about our production. It helped us understand our yields. And then when you're also talking about knowing your cost, don't forget to include your losses or in the product that you keep for yourself, because that comes out, those are all produced at a cost, but they need to be incorporated and you need to keep up with those, because once your losses get to be too much, you want to be able to identify that and then identify the problem and solve it and cut down on your losses. So one of the important things is understanding as we move into this, the different sales channels that we're going to sell through. There's basically going to be three weights that we're going to deal with when it comes to selling animals as animals or meat, right? So if we go down to the livestock sale and we drop an animal off, we're dealing on a live weight basis. And so live weight's exactly what it sounds like. It is that animal on four hooves, standing upright, living, breathing, screaming, kicking, trying to jump out of the pen, whatever it's doing, but it's live and well. And so that live weight is that animal. If you take it to sale barn, this is the live weight of the animal is what you're going to get paid off of when that animal sells. And when you take that animal to to slaughter, if you're selling into a branded program or maybe you're selling into freezer trade, you're going to use a term called hot carcass weight, most likely. So hot carcass weight, that's the weight of the carcass. When you take that animal to slaughter and immediately after it's been killed and eviscerated and skinned out and the hooves are removed and the head's removed and that animal is ready to roll into the cooler, the processors are going to take a weight on that animal at that point. And so that is why it's referred to as a hot carcass weight, so because it is the point taken at the point that carcass is still hot and has not had a chance to cool and evaporate and lose weight there. So for lambs, when we're talking about this, it's a pretty wide range. So depending on your breed, depending on your finish on your lambs, and depending on the size of those, you're going to yield somewhere between 45 and 55% of that live weight is what your hot carcass weight should end up. Now it's really handy if you if you know these, and I'll give some examples here in a little bit when we get into some more records that I'll show you. But understanding and making sure you're consistent on this, because this can be a sign that you got your production nailed down. And what we're really finding on these is production. Production really is the key. Having a good production system to move these lambs through and get them to where they need to be. But this hot carcass weight is also going to be what the processor is going to charge you off of, if they charge on a per pound basis. But most of the lambs here in North Carolina, I don't know how it is in Kentucky. Most of our processors here have moved to a flat fee scenario for sheep and goats. And so they just charge a flat fee to cut, to kill, and to cut and wrap. So the next step, after we come down from the hot carcass, we've got our carcass, and we give that processor a cut sheet. And then after that animal has chilled for a couple days or aged to whatever specifications the processor and you agree on, they're going to take it out and they're going to bring it to their processing floor, and they're going to cut it to the specifications you give them in the cut sheet. And this is where we see a much wider range of 60 to 80% of that hot carcass weight is what you're going to should get back in retail cuts. Now, this can vary significantly depending on how many bone-in cuts you get versus boneless. If you get a lot of boneless cuts, then your yield's evidently going to go down. You're going to end up with more trim waste. You're going to end up with more. And the further you process that animal, the more waste you'll have, and the lower this yield's going to be. Versus if you just clean that carcass up and they bandsaw him into little chunks of bone-in meat, you may be up there around the 80% mark of what you're getting back. But regardless, you're always going to have some weight loss, because during the period that animal sit in the cooler, it's been in there under fans, it's been losing moisture content. And then when you bring it out, there's always going to be some dried out spots. There's going to be glands. There's going to be some fatty areas that can't be incorporated into product and that are going to end up in the trash barrel. So you're always going to have a reduction from that hot carcass weight to your finished product weight on these in this scenario. But it's also important to understand these three, because if you're dealing with customers, you want to make sure, if you're selling on a hot carcass weight to somebody, that you're billing them that, you take time to explain what finished package weight is and how that varies from what they're paying you on. Because if they write you a check based on 50 pounds, you can bet somebody's going to get their kitchen scales out and weigh it all up and realize they have 35. And they're going to start calling you at 10 o'clock at night, wanting to know where their other 15 pounds of meat are, because that's what they paid you for. So make sure you understand those and make sure you convey those to the customer where appropriate. This is a cut sheet from the American Lamb Board, or actually this is from OSU and the American Lamb. But this shows some of the different cuts and what primals they come out of. So if you're in the meat selling business, you can reach out to the American Lamb Board. You can print these off, or you can reach out and you can probably order full-size posters and marketing materials through them. Here's another one, another example. This is from Oklahoma State, but it shows, 120-pound lamb being turned into a 54-pound carcass, and then the fat bone and waist is trimmed out, and then the 49 pounds of meat. I like this one because it also walks through as you get cuts back. Not necessarily every cut on the cut sheet is something you can get. So you can get a crown roast, or you can get rib chops, or you can get rib roast, but you can't get all three at once. So understanding, if you're going to be in marketing these, you need to understand where those cuts come from and how they move through. And of course, freezer space requirements is always good to have a recommendation or have a handle on how much space they'll take up so that you can relate it to customers. All right, so that's a little background on cutting the meat. So one of the unique things with lamb and a lot of producers is something we had challenges with over the years. It's also something most of the producers I've worked with have challenges with when it comes to selling lamb as meat is, there is a challenge in the management aspect of it. If you're going to get into selling meat, what we see is the really successful ones are the people that have that management aspect of their production dialed in. They have good health programs. They get consistent weight gain. They have their nutrition. They've got good pastures. They're supplementing. Those animals are moving forward and gaining and doing really good. They're performing well. They're not under nutritional duress during, the grow out phase. And this is really important because we need those animals to reach a certain size to where the yields they actually you're maximizing that genetic potential, you're maximizing the investment, and you're getting the maximum return on the yields that you can. I mean, you've got to be able to get those animals to size and do it efficiently in order to make this a profitable endeavor. Once again,
Lee,
yes.
I'm just going to interrupt you because I saw I missed one back there on chat that on the yields and weights that I want you to address really quickly if you can. It just says, does using live hot carcass or retail weight need to correlate with your market channel? For example, if selling hot carcasses directly to a restaurant, do you need to make that based on hot carcass, whereas freezer meat would be retail?
You could be either way. So if you're selling, if you're selling a whole lamb to a restaurant, you're going to be selling off hot carcass weight, most likely. And you may we always sold off hot carcass weight. Uh, we could get it weighed and get a sticker put on it, but most of the processors just pull it right off the rail and they've got the hot carcass weight on there, and that's what we sold off of. When you're selling off a freezer, you could go either direction. You could either base it off a hot carcass weight, or you could base it off of the amount of finished product they've got. And I'll run through examples of how to calculate break even on both of those. Um, so when it comes to marketing, depending on where you're at in the country, the marketing, finding that customer base can be a challenge. Around here in North Carolina and the South is traditionally this is a lot of pork country and beef country close behind it. And so when it comes to consumption, and so we don't have a tradition of eating a lot of lamb here. But as we get folks moving in from up north that did grow up eating lamb on a regular basis, those customers are out there. And so sometimes you have to figure out where they're at and where those customers are and where those customers are that have a willingness to pay the prices you need to get. So marketing and find that customer base can be a challenge. Um, and then especially when you put it in the context of imports, and a lot of people calibrate um, their thought on how much they should pay for land based on what it is that the Piggly Wiggly or Harris Teeter or Publix, and a lot of that being imports from New Zealand and Australia, which are quite frankly below what we can even produce it for here as a local meat product. So those imports can cause a challenge in marketing and finding people to or having people have something cheap that they think your product is comparable to. And then high processing costs. Like I said, here in North Carolina, I'd say most of our processors have moved to a flat fee. So it's 120 to 140, 150 bucks per head to get that animal killed and then cut and packaged. And it doesn't matter if it's a 30-pound hot carcass weight or whether it's a 120-pound hot carcass weight. But the challenge there is, since you're not paying by the pound, that doesn't scale very well. That's treated, if you're familiar with financial stuff, that's like a fixed cost. It's the same regardless of size. So another important point for having lambs that get some size to them, you want as many pounds on that carcass as you can get in order to have more weight to spread that $140 expense across. And once again, in our examples, we're going to show you here shortly, that should be evident. But just keep in mind, management is one thing that the one thing in this whole scenario that you probably have the most control over. And so make sure that if you're doing this, that you get your production game on point and that you're raising those lambs and maximize. So running through record keeping here. So this was shared to me by a friend of mine. We were talking. He says, "Hey, here, I'm going to send you my lamb reports." So these are actual lamb weights. These are Katahdin and Katahdin Dorper crosses, and St. Croix thrown in there, I believe. He told me, I can't remember for sure. Anyway, they're all 100% grass fed, grass finished. So the ewes get a little supplementation, but the lambs are not being grain fed, and so they keep up. And this is one of the things we were talking about. How whether he wants to move off of that protocol or not, and do a little supplementation. But this is a chart of their lambs from last year, I believe. I sorted them by hanging weight. So we're starting up here with number 41, hanging weight of 27. And then goes down here to heaviest hanging weight of 48 and number 2. I don't have live weights. Oh, yeah, I do have live weights on these. So I actually have an accurate dressing percentage to go along with it. But what we got when we sorted through here and looked at it, as we sorted these by hot carcass weight, started looking at it and say, all right, so what's the common denominator here? What made a good heavy lamb carcass out of all of these? And so the first place we looked was like, what about date of birth? Well, if you look here, our biggest lambs and our smallest lambs all were born, well, it looks like about 24 hours of each other. So, all right, so we cross that out. So date of birth doesn't really matter. What about days to finish? Maybe those bigger ones had a little bit longer. Same thing here. Our top lambs had right there the same amount of days. So the days to finish. What really did correlate though is when we started looking at these average daily gains. So these low performing lambs were only putting on 1/4 pound a day, while these higher performing lambs were in the 0.35 and to 4.41 pounds per day of gain. And so over the course of that 200 days, that made a 30 pound difference, in 20 to 30 pound difference in the weight of those lambs. And then, so as we move forward, we also see our dressing percentage, yes, lower down here on the lower end, but not significantly lower. But we do see that, several of these heavier lambs dressed over 50%. Most of these were 2 to 5% lower than under 50%. So those lighter weight lambs, this tells me that, they just weren't getting the muscle on them. They weren't getting the gain. They weren't getting the fat that they needed to be good products.
Lee, is that sheet shareable? There's a question.
When we get done, I will also have this. We'll have this, and I'll send out a PDF of, or have a PDF version of these slides available. But no, I can't share the Google sheet that he shared with me. That was from his work. So,
And then
Um,
what should we shoot for in dressing percentages? I can also share like the butcher stole my meat if that's
so
helpful.
what we're seeing here is these being grass-fed lambs. I was talking to Dr. Weaver, our small animal specialist, and these are pretty normal for Katahdin hair sheep based animals, unless you're getting into those wool animals that are thicker, or something like textile. These animals that really put on the heavy muscling, you may get up in the 50s, 55% dressing weight. But for the most part, hair-based genetics, you're probably going to be between 45 and 50%, was his opinion on that. So if overall, based on what he has said, these aren't bad. And these really aren't bad for grass-fed genetics. And this guy, actually, their program, they do have a good pasture program and a good animal husbandry program where he works. So look and see, and hopefully you should really be in that somewhere between 45 and 55% of your dressing weight. And if you're not, then you want to take a look at how big are you getting your lambs? How can you get more weight on them? How can you effectively get more weight on them? Do you need to look at changing up your nutrition program and your health program to do that? So taking these numbers, we're going to take a look and we're going to dive through some examples. And so as an example, I'm just going to do a comparison between the lightest and the heaviest. So we're going to use tag number 41 with a hanging weight of 27 and tag number 2 with a hanging weight of 48 in these following examples. So this is where I'm pulling these numbers from. These are actual recorded numbers. So lamb number 2, let's look at him and see what he says. So what's the net worth, lot of a live weight lamb right now? I was talking to Dr. Weaver. He said, we're looking at somewhere around $4 a pound at New Holland. So I looked up the New Holland prices, and based off of the average weight for the class at 96 on fat lambs, landed about $396 for that lamb. So looking at that, that is what, if you don't know your production cost, and I know we've always said one of the extension things is we've beaten everybody's head, record keeping, know your cost. But the reality of it is, sometimes we get started up, we've got 100 different things. This is a part-time gig. If we don't know what our starting costs or our actual production costs are, let's look at that and start our starting point at what we know we can get that lamb today. So if I took that lamb to market, and this 396, like I said, this is based on the New Holland, Pennsylvania lamb report from this week or last week. But if you base this, if you've got a livestock sale down the road from you and you can get $200, start with $200. But start with what that lamb's worth live. Because what we want to look at is we do meat, we want to know where we fall in this. If we max this thing out, we don't want to figure this lamb's worth $100 if we can get $300 more for him at the local sale. We don't want to shortchange ourselves and leave a lot of money sitting on the table. So make sure you're using this. And another challenge with this is as we move through those cycles, if we're looking to maximize our profit per animal at any given point in time, we may be doing this assessment of our animals and our pricing and our break-even points at several points during the course of a year to take into account different market fluctuations, or if we have lambs during certain parts of the year when there's a high demand for them, we may need to make sure we're using a high enough price in that base price that we're not leaving money on the table and that we're getting paid for the extra work. Anyway, moving forward, here with this first one, so we got a live weight. We've established a worth of almost $400. We know from our records that we have a hot carcass weight of 48 pounds. And so from that, I'm using 75%, saying that's what our yield from hot carcass weight is in our finished packaged product. And I'm keeping this consistent over both lambs for comparison's sake. So that gives us 36 pounds of finished product, sellable, eatable product out of this lamb. Now, we know our processing cost on this lamb was $140 for the head. And so we're going to add all these amounts. So we got our $396 live weight, live value. We're adding our $140 processing. Now, also adding $50 in marketing costs. Now, this is just a very basic because I know if I'm going to sell this lamb as meat, I got to take him to the processor and I got to pick him up and I got to deliver him. And I'm also going to have some time collecting checks and stuff in there. And I'll kind of show you how this breaks down when we run it through the price calculator. But I added $50 of marketing cost to both of these. And so that gives me a total cost or on this lamb to turn him into meat and get him to a customer at a bare minimum. I've got almost $600 in him, $586. So when I take and I run the same calculations on the smaller lamb, I run the numbers from New Holland again. He was at a value of about $253. There's our hot carcass weight of 27, 75%. That means that we got about 20 pounds of meat out of him to sell. Our processing costs, once again, that's still the same as it was on that larger lamb. And so we add these together, same way, another $50 in marketing cost, and we come to the conclusion that we have about $443 in this lamb starting off as a bare minimum, turning him into meat and getting him to a customer. So looking at these, now we know where we're at. We know where we landed. We know we can calculate a break-even price. And so this comes in handy because as we look at a break-even price, we can then, this gives us some quick monkey math to be able to say, all right, this is something I can work with. If my break-even price is $5 and I know that I can sell lamb, all day long at $10, then I know that I'm pursuing a path worth taking. If I come back, my break-even price is $20 a pound, and I know my customers are only going to pay $12, I might want to just go ahead and take my $400 and take him down to the stock sale. But that's a critical component of establishing, a market channel and whether it's worth it is knowing what that break-even cost is. And so side-by-side comparison here, we've got lamb 1, lamb 2, so 96 pounds and 60 pounds. Same numbers we had before. So when we divide that out, that $586 total value, and if we're looking at hot carcass weight, say for freezer lamb, I divide it by the 48-pound hot carcass weight. That gives me a break even to cover all those costs and get my $400 for that lamb that we valued him at. I've got to be able to get at least $12.21 a pound based on the hanging weight. Now, when I do the same math with the smaller lamb, and remember, our marketing price cost us the same to haul a little lamb as it did to haul a big lamb to the processor and deliver it to the customer, and it cost us the same to get him killed as it did that big lamb. But when we break that down and divide it by the hot carcass weight, you can see our price is significantly higher for a break-even price. So now, because of that smaller lamb and those basically fixed expenses of marketing and processing, I have to have a higher price per pound just to break even on this thing. Here's a comparison on the retail, and I did the same calculation. Took that overall value, divided it by the pounds of retail cuts that we calculated on the previous slides. And you can see up here, my gap gets even further apart. The large lamb, I break even 16.27, and on my smaller lamb, my break even price is now 22.15. And that means I've got to average 22.15, not just on my lamb chops, but I've got to average that through my ground lamb, my lamb chops, my lamb roast, and everything. That needs to be my average price on that 20 pounds of meat. So just out of curiosity, I broke that down to look at just how much does processing add to us when we talk about this being an overhead cost and that fixed cost of a solid price per animal. And so processing cost on the big one breaks down to $2.91 a pound when you do the math on it. That's 24% of this break-even price for the hot carcass weight is tied up in processing cost. On the small one, because you have less yield, you have smaller hot carcass weight, you have more of that per pound. So you can see 32% of that $16 a pound is tied up, is in processing cost. So hopefully that helps demonstrate how much a fixed cost like that hurts uh, when you have smaller carcasses. And then you can see here, whenever I bump it over into compare it to the retail, um, we have an increase here of to 388 a pound for retail, but we remained at still 24% of our break-even price. So it remained pretty steady. Down here on the smaller one, we're at $7 a pound in processing cost. So close to 43% of your break-even cost is in processing. So processing is a significant input, and that's why we need to, especially where we have single price kill and processing fees, we need to make sure we're getting bigger lambs into this, so we have more meat to spread that cost out over. Okay. Move through that pretty quickly. Any quick questions on that? If you do, drop them in the chat. We'll move in. So when I ran through the math here, I want to show you this is a program. This is Meat Suite. Matt LaRue developed this up at Cornell years ago. One of the things that we've done is we worked with him to adapt it. It's a listing for farmers in New York and North Carolina to sell bulk meat, but it's also a resource for folks that want to sell meat and sell meat in bulk. And so if you go to meatsuite.com, and suite like a suite of tools, and go up here to the top corner where it's farmers and processors and click on it, and you'll get a drop down menu in this tools and resources. You don't have to be in North Carolina or New York to utilize our tools and resources and take advantage of this. So if you click on that, that'll bring you to our landing page. And so here we have the meat price calculator. We've got a couple other tools. We also have some resources down here. Feel free to come on the Meat Suite and check those out and utilize those however you can. But we're going to talk a bit about the meat price calculator. This is developed at Cornell by Matt. Also, and this is a way to take kind of the same similar calculations we made a few slides ago and dress them up and put them in a nice program to where they're easier to use than creating a spreadsheet. But you can go here, you can create an account. It says that you're limited to New York, Massachusetts, and North Carolina, but I think you can we've got it now where anybody can create an account. And the nice thing with that is it allows you to come in here and you can save your calculations if you create an account. You can also try the tool for free. There's a section on Get Prepared that gives you a list of the things that come in handy. You'll need to know there's data that you need to have handy, production data and cost and marketing cost, and your yields. And so go to the Get Prepared section, peruse it, and get familiar with it. And then when you get to the calculator, you can either use it as a guess or you can create an account and use your account. So today we're going to use this as a guess. So we're going to click here on the green bar, and that's going to bring up this, and it's going to bring up your create a new price list. And so making this a lamb pricing example, if you have an account, you can create this. You can call this freezer sales. And we're going to do a freezer example, but it allows you to calculate prices depending on your marketing channel. And it's got a drop down box here. You can select farmers markets, wholesale, direct, farm store. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can use it for multiple species. It allows you to put in almost as much processing and marketing price information as you want to. And so for this example, I'm just going to walk you through it real quick and do a quick freezer trade example. We're doing lamb, we're doing carcass and not cuts. And then I'm going to hit create this price list. And so now we'll go into and get the details on these. And so once again, I'm using, this is just a screenshot of that slide about 4 or 5 slides back of lamb number 2. We're going to use the numbers directly off of it. So cost of production. I don't know my cost of production, so I'm just going to use what I know I can get out of this lamb. And so in this example, I'm actually going to use the price calculator to look at it as calculate my break-even price, similar to what we did earlier, but maybe take it a little bit further. As you see here, this does account for and have some places you can put some profit into these. So here I can put my production cost. So if my lamb was production cost was $200 a lamb, and I wanted to put $196 here and end up with the same grand total of $396, I could do that. For this example, though, we're going to treat the we're going to leave the pricing the profit out of this and just look at it to assess, whether this is something we want to pursue. And so I put $1 in here for production profit because the computer program does not like to have zeros in anything. So we're going to make $1 on this. And you can see we're working in the your cost tab here. And so as I get into the your cost, now it gives me the processing. We were in production here. Now we're moving into processing. I think if I hit, whoops. And so we're in the processing tab here of these 3, and I put in my hot carcass weight. I enter my kill fee, that $140. Cut and wrap, once again, it doesn't like zero, so I had to put a penny per pound, even though there's no cost. Now, my $50 marketing fee. This is how I kind of broke it down in my head. My trucking cost me $20 a haul lamb to my processor. May cost you $2, it may cost you $200. I don't know. But whatever there, the more accurate you can claim that number, the more accurate your price assessment will be. I've got a delivery cost, figuring either of picking that lamb back up from the processor and getting him out. That's $20. So there's $40 of my $50 I had accounted for in my previous calculations. So now I'm going to hit save and go to the next step. And it's going to take me to this marketing tab. And now I'm going to put my marketing labor. This is the last $10 of that $50 I had calculated earlier. So I put $10 in there. You can also add a marketing profit. Once again, the computer doesn't like a zero, so I'm making another $1 here. But this is kind of accounts for how many hours do you have to spend in this channel. I'm figuring to sell a lamb, it's probably going to take me, an hour, half hour to an hour on the phone talking to people to get a commitment and get that lamb sold. That's kind of what it is. If we were going to a farmer's market, we knew we were going to spend 2 hours driving there and 2 hours driving home and 4 hours sitting at the farmer's market, then we would need to put in the labor for that 8 hours of market labor. Once again, the more detail you can add into it, the more accurate your price report will be at the end. But for this example, we're there. We hit save and go to the next step. And so now we go to here and we go from we've gone from this your cost tab to your prices. And so my current price, I'm just pulled a number out of the air. It was what we used to sell lambs for 15 years ago. And I also happen to know from my previous calculations that this is going to be way low. So put $7.50 a pound in, and that includes the processing. So go to that, hit save and continue. And then it's going to give me a price report of what am I selling this lamb for at that price. So it takes my $48 a pound, multiplies it toward times the price I put in, and then gives me the total of $360 per head. So the next step is we're going to go to this results tab, and it's going to give me this little customized report that tells me whether or not I am meeting my goals. And as you can see by all the red on this page, I have failed to meet my goals and meet my expenses. And so if you look, it's saying that my total cost that I entered was $588.48. My selling price is currently based on the 750 a pound. I'm getting $364, leaving me $228.48 in the hole based on the information I entered. Now, this is great. All right, I know I'm below par. So what's the next step? We're going to go up here and we're going to go to the revised prices tab. And this is nice because it pulls it up and it shows you those same numbers of where you were, and it gives you the opportunity here to adjust your pricing. And so where we were at 750, let's change that, and then we're going to save it. And then we'll end up on this next page. And after I changed it to $12.50 a pound. And voila, we are in the green. It says everything's looking good. Now, if I had added $100 marketing profit in here, my expenses would have been $100 more, and I would have had to adjust my price until I was in the green to make this, over $688. But as for right now, I know that I am meeting my expenses. I'm looking at it as a break even in using this tool this way. And I say, all right, that means that I need to be able to get $12.50 a pound hanging weight to sell a lamb and be profitable. Is this market channel somewhere I want to go? And if I call my restaurants and they say, we'll pay you $15 a pound, you can come right back to this page and you can type $15 a pound, and you now have a better assessment of what your gain and loss would be based off of what you can actually get. So what I did, I was just playing with this number, put 1250 in. I knew that was right around or a little bit over my break-even price that we determined earlier. And then, but if I was getting $15 a pound, or I thought I could get $15 a pound, I put that in there, and then I can look and I can see how much am I able to make at that price. And is that make that a viable option for me when I look at all the prices and results in that. And so once I get done, it gives me we're back to another calculation page. If I were to go through and do this in a by the cut assessment or a different market channel, you'll see down here there's additional processing costs. You can literally add in processing costs for making hot dogs, for sausages, seasoning costs, all these extra charges your processor would add on. You can add those into the calculator and it will take it to the nth degree if you supply information to the nth degree. So if you look at this and you say, well, here's the challenge. I don't know if I can get $12.50 or $15 a pound or whatever. So think about how is your marketing? Remember the chart with the arrows going up and down. So the higher the price you command, the more marketing you need to do to reach those customers and get in front of them. And so you need to think about it. Are we working in a production system to where we're making a product and we're putting it out there and we're like, here, take this, buy my lamb. That's called push marketing. It's you're putting a product out there, and then the challenge is it falls on you to persuade or to educate those consumers on why they should buy your product. When you move to a marketing driven by pull marketing, that's referring to you've now found the customer base that says, I want lamb. I'm willing to pay for lamb. And you then present your product. So they pull you along because they're already wanting it. There's no education. There's not a lot of outreach involved. It's just making them aware. So keep that in mind as you move forward in your marketing, and take a good assessment of your prices. Make sure that your prices account for what you need to get paid, and then find a market that you can move through. And remember that you really need to support your pricing with marketing effort. And so if you think about this, to put it in a production scenario, I know that these are more slides that I stole from Matt, or Matt provided. But think about it in this way. If you take a lamb to the weekly sale barn, they throw him in there, and you got 10 lambs show up along with 500 cows, and not many sheep buyers are there, right? You might get a couple bucks a pound for them if you're lucky, but you really haven't had to do anything. But if you take that same lamb and you wean them and you have them in a good body condition score and they're castrated and they're started on feed, and you take them down to a graded lamb sale where there's 1,500 lambs that show up and they're grading them and the buyers, uh, all of a sudden you've got 200 buyers looking to buy lambs that show up. You've now placed that lamb with that. You've taken the extra effort to market that lamb and put him in a place that he would be appreciated and buy. So that's the difference between that. The same thing applies to your marketing. Identifying where those target customers are going to be, what product they want, and then getting in front of them with that product and providing it in a place that's convenient to them and that they're willing to pay for that convenience. Same thing here. When they show up at the graded lamb sales, they expect to pay more because they expect to have weaned lambs that are in good shape and ready to grow when they take them home. If they show up at the weekly sale and they know they're only going to have one or two to choose from, they're not going to pay much for them because they don't know whether they've been weaned on the ride down there or not. So same thing there. Support your pricing with marketing effort. And Matt likes to tell the story of he had somebody stand up and says, "Well, I would never be able to get that that much for my product." And he's like, "But your marketing effort consists literally of having a magnetic sticker on the side of your truck, and that's the extent of your marketing. You're not out there actively marketing and finding the consumer base. You're just riding around with a truck and a sign on it. So keep it in mind, that sometimes to support those prices you need a more active marketing plan than a sign at the end of the driveway or a sign on the side of your truck. So in conclusion, keep good records. First and foremost, know your cost, have a good production system, take an honest assessment of your production system, and are you at a point that you're able to produce the product that will make you successful? Identify your customer base, and then make a plan. But most of all, push the pencil and know your numbers. There's my information along with Matt's. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. Once again, it's meatsweet.com. I should have added that here, but ncchoices.com is our home website, and that will get you to a treasure trove of 20 some years of materials that we have there of around direct marketing and reaching consumers. And so feel free to peruse those and reach out if you have questions on anything. And we are right at 8 o'clock. But if we have questions, I don't mind one bit hanging around until we get those answered. So if you got to go, we understand. And if not, we're glad to stay here for a little bit.
So I have a question for you. So obviously, the making the calculator work is going to be best if you can put in your true production costs. So do you have a suggestion on like example budgets that people can go and look at in order to start trying to track that information?
Oh man, is I should have been prepared for that question.
It's okay. So say we have one like for an example, like 100U flock and like the things that are on there. And I think Susan Schoinen had some, on her Maryland site, but I didn't know if you had one specifically that you liked.
Yeah, I was thinking Maryland has some good sheep budgets. I think Virginia Tech has a few. Um, A&M has had Texas A&M has had some in the past. Um, and just find budgets and remember budgets are suggestions. So when you pull a budget off the internet, look at the categories and plug in your own numbers. If you're starting from scratch, they're fine but call around, plug in accurate fertilizer number, plug in accurate rent numbers. The better the information you put into a budget or into a meat price calculator, the better the results are. Uh,
So I asked that question like on the tracking cost. I'm thinking for people that are either going to sell like freezer meat or do a farmer's market, um, should they calculate their electric and like depreciation on freezers and trailers and that kind of stuff in that tracking cost? And then Sarah said it would probably be better on the production side. So would you all have a list of things that you would recommend, like knowing as far as that's concerned, to add into a production budget? Because I guarantee the ones that we find online are not going to include any of that in
Yeah,
there.
and so the way I always encourage people to look at it is even within your operation, if you can break it down into multiple enterprises and consider it such. So if you're running a flock of ewes and you're producing lambs, that is an enterprise. And you need to assess ewes and ewe and lamb operation completely separate of the meat operation. So you want to make sure you know your numbers on the production end of things for that aspect. Then you got to take those lambs, and if you're going to hold them over and you're going to have a feeding period or a 4, 5, 6 month that you're holding them and pasture them, that needs to be a grower operation. You need to do the penciling on that. And then the processing and marketing comes separate from those two operations. And so that way you can give an honest assessment. Because sometimes people get in it, and especially if you're in an area where land prices are high or access to land is really low, being able to look and say, all right, I'm better off not trying to have 100 ewes when I can buy the lambs I need from my neighbor for this basically the same amount it would cost me to produce them. Or I don't have the time. So if you can take a separate look at those and keep those as separate enterprises, that comes in handy. Then you can also look at what do you need to get by. So yeah, for depreciation and stuff, you're going to have freezers and trailers and coolers and such. You'll probably have labor that you wouldn't have otherwise, that go towards the marketing end of things. You're going to have, websites. You're going to have giveaways, coupons. There's all sorts of stuff that can go into marketing. I think one of the things, my personal experience between a butcher shop and farming, is that marketing is one of those places that it is an investment. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be an investment. It should be a critical part of your plan, because a good plan, marketing dollars spent come back multiple fold. And if it doesn't matter whether you're talking about restaurants, or you're talking about farms, if you look around, the ones that are doing a lot of sales, they pay attention to what they're doing, because they're putting money into marketing, whether it be social media or a combination of traditional and social media. Um, it costs money, and so that needs to be accounted for. But it's a critical part of getting out there and reaching those customers. And honestly, in 2026, you're looking at, while it's difficult and overwhelming with all the social media options, it is so much easier to get and reach people than it was 15 years ago.
Yeah, like
When
word of mouth
you
has a
wanted to get
whole
a
different
restaurant,
connotation these days than it used to.
yeah, it's you used to have to go beat on doors, literally go beat on the back door of a restaurant, and be like, "Hey, you want to buy some product from me? Here." And so, now you can have a social media presence and reach out. Let's see. What else we got in the questions? I see one, Jeff. Do restaurants use hanging weight prices from New Zealand and Australia? How would you compete with that if they can produce at a lower quality? And that's one thing really in marketing, and I tell a lot of folks is there's your story has value. We all have a story. We're all in it for some reason. We have family farms, we have families, we have, you know, something we're trying to accomplish. And there are customers out there that won't, that's a critical part of your marketing. It's also a critical part of your value. And so you can't compete with New Zealand and Australia, but guess what? They can't put a face with the Australian sheep producers like they can with somebody down the road. And so making sure you add that value by conveying your story and producing a good quality product, and knowing that there's value in being able to pick up the phone and call me when you have a problem, or when you need something, or when you all of a sudden run short. There's value in that, and customers that are willing to pay for it are going to appreciate that.
I always
And so,
tell
yeah,
people
you can't compete with commodity. You just can't do it. They have the advantage of scale, and Australia has a hell of a scale.
exactly. I always tell people it's worth you going to like your local Sam's or Costco and looking at that New Zealand box meat take it home, open it up, and hopefully, your ribeye areas are bigger and your product is going to be fresher. Like those are the kind of things that you're going to be able to sell to a restaurant, because they want to sell the top quality meats to their customers because they want them to be repeat customers. So when you can do things like that and prove that your product is better, you'll have a much better opportunity to sell in those areas. And a lot of customers want local products too. So it's not hard to get
There,
to a restaurant. The problem with the restaurants is volume and supply all the time that they want it.
and they've got a price point to hit. It. So restaurant, I tell everybody, restaurants are, unless you're huge, restaurants are a hard main marketing channel. They're great for exposure. If you can get on the menu, that gets you in front of, if those restaurants are where you've got customer base, it puts your name out there. If you need to move volume and you can find chefs that will work with you to move the things that you have trouble moving elsewhere. There are great chefs out there that love to work with hearts and kidneys and livers and all these bones and fat. They're hard to find. They're one in a million, but when you find them, they are gold for a direct marketer because they can help you move inventory that you need to move, capture some value out of things that you might otherwise would have thrown away or that your regular consumers don't want. But there's two things that came out of COVID. One being that online opportunities got extremely easy compared to pre-COVID. Before COVID, you needed to have, it seemed like a PhD in computer engineering to set up an online store. During COVID, I guess all the computer engineers sitting at home, nothing doing, are like, well, let's make it easier for the farmers. So we've got options now we never even would have dreamed of 6-7 years ago. And so it's easier to take advantage of that. And online is easier to reach a wider audience. It's all about reach. And then two is the other thing come out of COVID was the fact that when people saw empty grocery stores, all of a sudden they were like, man, I should get to know my farmer. And that has hung in there to a great degree in the last six years, is that people have added value to it. And we also have high commodity prices, which has helped because when your grocery store prices are here and your local prices are here, it's a lot easier to swallow than when they're a big difference. And so it becomes a lot easier to pay for that story that you're selling them. The other thing that I think right now with lamb in particular is in a neat position because if you look at the price of beef in the grocery stores, and that gap has gotten, it used to be lamb was $12 a pound and beef was $3. Now all of a sudden ground beef's $8-9 a pound, and ground lamb's way closer than it used to be. All of a sudden it's easier to talk people into trying it, or people love lamb, they just don't think they can afford it. So it's in a good point now that if you're marketing, don't miss out on that opportunity to get in front of some beef people and do it. Because I've told everybody I love beef, I love pork. I was like, but if I got my choice for a last meal, it'd probably hands down be something lamb. I mean, it's just that good. So
I was gonna say, I really enjoy getting the American Lamb Board quarterly retail reports because you're like, the past 3 or 4 months, like you can really see how that's happening. And I think they even reported on the retail sales for lamb are continuing to tick up. And we were afraid that with the prices that, people wouldn't buy it. But now that beef is right up there, this is golden for us at this point in time to make that happen. So,
Jeff, you put a question in there. I'm gonna pop you on there if you want to ask it. You're talking about herd share. What in particular with herd share? How do you get? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but so I mean I'm assuming you're kind of like a CSA program, but you know direct to Yeah, I'm assuming like herd share, you're referring to like CSAs, so they get a proportion on a regular basis. That can be a good way to introduce people to lamb. Smaller portions get a long-term commitment out of them. If you're not familiar with the CSA model, it's where people pay you up front for a 6 month or a year or 3 month supply, and then you have monthly or weekly deliveries to them. Processing on the farm, that's a really good question. So I can't speak to Kentucky and other states. I can tell you what is here in North Carolina. Federal law requires that if an animal is to be turned into meat and that meat's sold as a meat product in commerce, that animal has to go through an inspected slaughter process. So for North Carolina, that means that it either goes to a USDA plant or we have a state inspection program that's run by our Department of Agriculture. So they either come out of there with an NCDA stamp or a USDA stamp. Those products are eligible to be turned into meat and sold by the piece. If that animal goes to a custom exempt plant, which are still a lot of custom exempt plants around, but they are viewed by USDA as providing a service to the owner of the animal. And so that meat comes out of there and it does not have a mark of inspection on it. In other words, there is no inspector looking at it when it dies to make sure that it is healthy and wholesome and fit for consumption. That's up to the owner of the animal. So if you utilize those, it's possible to utilize those to sell to customers. You just have to sell it as a live animal. You can deliver it to the processor, but that they assume ownership of that live animal and then it's theirs. The processor kills it. They pay the processor, etc. Different states have different interpretations of that. I'm telling you what North Carolina does. New York, at one point they had said, if you 10 people want to own an animal, that's fine. North Carolina has said, if you're splitting a beef, 4 families could own a beef in theory. We're fine with that. But if you start getting 10 or 12 families owning a beef, then you're just circumventing the law. So there is some state interpretation to it, but by federal guidelines, anything that is going to be sold as meat has to be killed under inspection. Doesn't mean that that's not an option to have somebody come out with an inspected truck and kill on your farm. We don't have inspected trucks here in North Carolina. I know some of the states out west do. I don't know the situation in some of the other surrounding states. I can't speak to that, but yeah, so that may be an option. But other than that, on-farm slaughter has to be for the owner of the animal on their own property here. So I can't kill it. I can't sell you a live lamb and you come out here to my farm and you kill that lamb and take it home. You would have to take that live lamb to your land or your property and kill it there. That's something that's gotten a lot of people in trouble here over the years. They used to have a lot of ethnic groups come out, want to buy a lamb for Cinco de Mayo or Ramadan, and then they would kill them on the spot. Yeah, they cracked down on that about 15 years ago here. All right. Can a custom exempt owned by a restaurant owner can that be served in a restaurant? No, because once again, that animal did not go through a process. By the letter of the law, custom exempts actually in the wording is that custom exempt processing is for the use, those products are for the use of the owner of that animal, the members of their household, and non-paying guests. So technically, by the letter of the law, that is for you to take home and feed to your family and your guests under your roof only. You're not supposed to take it home and give half of it to your one kid and third of it to the other one and part of it for yourself. It's supposed to be for you, the owner of that animal. So it can't enter commerce, and any kind of restaurant sale would be considered commerce. So yeah, that kills it.
I tell people if you're questioning whether to custom or the USDA, if you do custom, then sell the animal right there. Like money has to exchange from your hands before you get to the processing plant. And then make sure that customer is the one that calls and does the cut sheet and then picks the meat up. And then that way there's no question. Nobody can come back and say, you didn't do it correctly.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I said, New York, Matt had talked to somebody up there and they're like, yeah, you can pay the processing. You can pick it up and deliver it to your customers. It's fine as long as, it's theirs to begin with. Here, our folks are like, yeah, no, once you provide a transaction that took place before that animal was killed, you can deliver it, but after that, you shouldn't touch it. You shouldn't pay the butcher. That's all on the customers, the owner of that animal moving forward. So there's subjectivity built into the system.
And quite frankly, the processors don't really want the liability of you not doing it correctly either. So they will ask.
It's interesting, Justin, to your comment, but the regulations. We actually had a meeting 2 years. I think it was 2 years ago, where we actually it was like a lot of processors. Because one of the biggest gripes with processing. I actually put recording before I start saying stuff. Uh, but one of the biggest things is like the overburden of regulation. And so we had a national meeting with a lot of processors and a lot of some academics, fellow academics and stuff. And so we were just talking like, okay, so what are the burdensome rules? And when it boiled down to it, it was like most everybody was like, yeah, we don't like them, but we see where they keep us safe. And so, it's a challenge. It's also one of those things where, the regulations are there. They're not impossible to comply with. They may be aggravating. Inspection personnel that are aggravating. There are parts that make it difficult. It's like anything else. But at the end of the day, we knock on wood to go with the the line, we have one of the safest meat supplies in the world, uh, because of such. So,
And ultimately, like again, because it comes down to liability. If we had willy-nilly processing rules, then I mean, if you're going to direct market, you need to have some liability insurance anyway. But if we had willy-nilly rules, the cost of that liability insurance would be so enormous you would never be able to do it. So it's a pain, but ultimately in the end, it allows you to be able to have that coverage at a reasonable price so that you can do this.
and that's something that's a really good point that you bring up, Kelly. Is like when you look at it, the liability, you could take and kill a lamb in your backyard and cut it up and take it to farmer's market and sell it until you got caught. But the fact is, if you did that, you've performed an illegal act, and you are now personally responsible for the liability of somebody getting sick or getting a bad product. Not a reflection on, you may do it. You may do it I've known people that did backyard butchery for 50 years selling sausage, around here. And everything was fine. Everything's fine until it's not fine. And then you have assumed the responsibility by not doing that. And the regulations do put in place a method to say, all right, I was following the rules, therefore I did my due diligence to provide you with a quality product. And that's why we have things like registering as meat handlers and different aspects of, if you're going to get involved in the business, you need to be able to meet certain requirements so that you demonstrate a good faith effort, and that liability is then you're shielded from it, in a liability standpoint. Yeah, and then liability insurance generally is expensive and ends up like an overhead cost. I know, and it depends on where you're going. We had when we were selling to a local college here some pork, we had to have liability insurance of a certain amount. It was like $800 a year. So I had to mark the pork I sold up to them. I hadn't sell them enough volume or sell them, have a markup on there that helped me cover that expense. I just treated it like another expense in my marketing. I knew that channel cost me an extra $800 a year, so I needed to sell X amount of animals to get to that point, or I needed to bump my prices up this much per animal to get to that point. And if you have those issues, you have those added costs, and people ask, why does my stuff cost more? Say, because you're getting the personal service, you're getting that delivery, you're getting that loving touch that you can't get through Cisco or US Foods or other commodity production and sales people.
But I mean, people will pay it. I have never talked to a sheep producer or a goat producer who wanted to sell directly to people that couldn't sell the meat. It's not a thing. Now, granted, I mean, there's always some odd cuts if you're not selling it as a carcass or a half carcass. But in the grand scheme of things, they've never not been able to move the product ever.
And I was using those examples of New Holland prices this time of year, and those lambs are $400. You look in June, and those lambs are going to be $200 lambs. So there's going to be big fluctuations, and so a lot of times I see this, especially with the cattle folks now. And you're looking at the swings in the cattle market and how high their prices are. The folks that are sticking in are going, look, I'm looking 10 years down the road. I know these prices are going to swing back downward. And while I may not be making up here now, I'm here and I want to keep my prices here so I don't have to go back down here,
Mm-hmm.
3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road. And so when you look at it that way, it makes a nice way of building a customer base, being able to sell your production, or at least a good chunk of it to kind of steady out that income stream over the long haul and get you a more steady path forward.
And if you have a windfall year, like, don't go buy a new truck. Like, make sure you invest back into the operation in a way that's going to make you more efficient, either in like feeding or breeding or whatever it is, because that also will help you even out over the years, to be able to handle those goofy fluctuations in prices.
Yeah, and genetics. I mean, having good genetics goes a long way. So if you're you've got a flock and they're thin muscled animals, spending the money, getting some good rams to put on them that are going to add muscle to them is going to go right back in those equations and give you a better yield, give you a better return, and put money in your pocket. And when you talk about things like, go to cattleman's meeting and be like, how much do you spend on a bull? I don't want to spend more than $1,000. It's like, what are you selling? Do the math. If you can put an extra, say 5 pounds on a lamb carcass, and how many ewes can a good ram cover in a breeding season? What's a good number for ewes?
I mean, a mature ram is probably
40.
40, right? 40,
So
45.
40, and you put in 5 pounds, you've added 200 pounds of meat to a cash crop at $15 a pound. So you've in one lamb crop, if you add 5 pounds to every lamb, you've added $3,000 to your return for by
Right.
buying a good ram. And if you keep him for 2 or 3 years, he's made you some serious money. And if he adds more than that, even better. And same thing, look at this as investment. And when you buy these genetics, the other thing is, you don't buy a Corvette and you run it on cheapest gas possible. You don't buy a Lamborghini and run it on 87 octane. You need to make sure you got the nutrition there for these genetics, because the genetics are investment, and you're buying performance, you're buying production, and so putting nutrition in them, good pastures, good nutrient dense feeds in them, so that they can perform and they can put on all the muscle they can and get to the finish they need to, is an important part of that, and that'll get you your better yields. So,
Yeah, buy good rams and cull hard.
yep,
And cull off your records, not by just looking at them. Like,
yep.
make sure you're culling with all the information available. I mean, the prices the way they are right now, like I was just even looking at, per head on, bucks or rams, like now's the time to cull people. Like if you're gonna do it, cull now, before it drops.
And also remember, we're talking about selling lamb here, but mutton, ground ewes taste pretty dang good too. So, if you got those big ewes that you can turn into ground mutton, uh, Mutton's harder to sell, but once again, it comes back to marketing. And if you can offer mutton for a little cheaper than you can a lamb because your yields are a lot better and you don't need to get, quite as high a price out of them, there's opportunity to sell those too and add a little value to those over at coal prices.